I'm just interested, what sort of evidence could science or the physical universe present to you that would make you think, actually, that is evidence that there's a mind behind this?
I find that a very difficult question.
To the fine-tuning of the universe, which obviously has a lot of ink has been spilled and a lot of airwaves have been filled on this show,
right,
debating that. It was actually one of your examples of kind of, because it's such a hard thing sometimes to imagine just how critically fine-tuned these particular forces are to allow for the emergence of life in the universe. You had a very good analogy for it in, I think, one of the early editions of Creator and the Cosmos, where you talked about piling pennies up to the moon.
Right.
Can you just describe that? Because that helps people, I think, to give a sense of what we're talking about here.
Well, I'll
just give you a few minutes to do that before Peter pitches in.
I think we both agree that the fine-tuning evidence is strong, but where I think we need to go is, okay, if there's no God behind all this, we're going to eventually see the fine-tuning evidence decline. But if the fine-tuning evidence gets stronger and stronger from a Christian worldview perspective, that's really evidence for a Christian worldview. And so that's kind of what we're documenting.
Give us an example of the fine-tuning and talk about pennies being piled up on continents and how that demonstrates.
Well, for example, to have life possible in the universe has to have a certain cosmic mass density. It has to have a certain space energy density. And we can measure how fine-tuned it must be in order for there to be any possibility of life anywhere in the universe. And it's at a level of 1 part in 10 to the 122nd power. And that far exceeds the best example of human engineering fine-tuned design by about a factor of 10 to the 97 times, which means the one that was responsible for that fine-tuning design must be more intelligent, more knowledgeable, more creative and powerful than we human beings. I mean, fine-tuning is basically an analogy argument. We compare our capability for fine-tuning design, what we see in the universe to make our existence possible. The other point we make is it looks like the fine-tuning evidence is much more persuasive if you want humans compared to if you want a bacterium. And particularly if you want a lot of humans on a planet with the technology where they can discover the great philosophical truths that lie behind the universe. That's where we see the greatest exponentiation of the fine-tuning evidence. And the fact that every month the fine-tuning evidence gets stronger than it was the month before.
I mean, one of the analogies I enjoyed was that given one of these forces that require to be so very specific in order for life to be able to develop in the universe to 1 part in 10 to the 37, and you compared it to covering the entire North American continent in dimes,
right,
all the way up to the moon, a height of about 239,000 miles. Next, pile dimes from here to the moon on 1 billion other continents the same size as North America. Paint 1 dime red and mix it into the billions of piles of dimes. Blindfold a friend and ask him to pick out the 1 dime, and those are the odds that they'll pick out the red dime at the odds of 10 to the 37.
And that's very conservative.
That's a very conservative.
Yeah, the odds are much more remote.
I think that kind of helps people to slightly grasp just how precise these values had to be, given that it appears they could have taken other values, but that they have these very specific values that do allow for the emergence of life. Now, you're familiar with this argument, Peter. And people like Hugh have been pressing that the atheist has to answer this problem. Why do we live in a universe which is so apparently fine-tuned for life to exist when it could have been otherwise?
Well,
is that not a very powerful argument for there being a creative intelligence behind it?
Let's unpick what's been said. First of all, God seems to have favoured rock more than life. As there is more rock in the universe than there is life. So he's made a peculiarly difficult selection of fundamental constants to get life. He could have chosen a different set of fundamental constants and avoided all the rock that there is. Think if all the rock was alive and worshipping him, he would be really satisfied. But, that's rather
We'll let Hugh come back to that in a moment, but yes, carry on.
So God favours rock rather than life.
Yes.
Secondly, we're basing our views on the kind of chemistry that we're familiar with, and different fundamental constants also lead to different properties of the elements. So maybe a slightly different choice of fundamental constants would mean that, say, aluminium or silicon would play the role of carbon much more satisfactorily than carbon currently does. We've no idea. Okay, but these are sort of superficial arguments. Got 2 more arguments.
Okay.
One is the possible argument I know Hugh is expecting me to roll out, that is that there's trillions of universes, and that...
the multiverse hypothesis.
Yeah,
yes.
you have to be careful with that term, but let's call it multiverse. Because there are quantum mechanical illusions there as well, which I don't want to go into. But suppose there are trillions and trillions, in fact 10 to the 1,000 raised to the 40 trillion universes, then it's not surprising that at least one of them has got this current complex.
We happen to have won the lottery of the multiverse in that sense.
We couldn't avoid winning it, as it were, because we're in it. So that's the
there's the
possibility. And whether one could ever get experimental evidence for the existence of the multiverse.
And are you in a sense more... Do you find that even as hypothetical as that theory is, it's more satisfactory than God as a possible explanation?
Because it involves no causality, and therefore no causa.
Right.
But the fourth, or whatever it is, argument is, I think you have to think about the foundations of what we're talking about. What's so special about life?
Okay.
Why are we making life such a marvelous property? I agree it's extraordinary. I agree that through evolution, life, once it had emerged from the inorganic, has led to our current consciousness, and who knows what in the future. But what's so special about it?
Is it somehow slightly, in a sense... a bit egotistic of us to somehow...
Yes, it's cosmo-egotistical, okay. I think. So life is a jolly nice property of matter. But apart from that, why put it on a pedestal?
Let's start bringing up some of these. God seems to have preferred rocks to humans. So is the universe actually fine-tuned for rocks?
Well, if you don't have a lot of rocks, you're not going to get humans. I mean, the total size of the universe must be extraordinarily fine-tuned to get life anywhere in the universe. So it must have a lot of rocks in order for life to be possible, given the laws of physics. And you mentioned the multiverse. All multiverse models are subject to the space-time theorem, so you don't avoid the causality issue. And I notice you quote Leonard Susskind. I mean, he's an atheist like yourself. But he wrote a paper basically saying we have to avoid, as atheists, the multiverse hypothesis. The reason why, it explains everything. And a model that explains everything explains nothing.
Like God.
Well, let me continue, because you'll see an analogy in the Creator and the Cosmos. Is if you're going to hypothesize a multiverse, you're going to have an infinite number of planets like Earth. You're going to have an infinite number of trees. You're going to have birch trees. Birch trees peel white sheets of bark. You're going to have an infinite variety of universes. They're going to have birch trees that peel pieces of bark that are the size of A4 paper. They're going to fall on soil that's got random chemicals in it that make markings on it, which means that all the papers published by all the scientists in the world didn't come from their minds. They came from the multiverse. The multiverse did it.
I've never heard such nonsense.
But the point Hugh's making, I think, is that in a multiverse where everything that can happen will happen, you've got everything sort of is...
No.
I mean...
You see, I told you to be very cautious in your use of the term. It could be that all those other billions, trillions, quadrillions of universes have no life in.
Well,
agreed, but if you're going to appeal to an actual infinity, you're actually going to wind up with an infinite number that have life in them.
Yeah, that's quite possible.
I mean,
that was
if
my
we're
whole
talking
point.
about...
It literally explains everything.
the strange sort
Sorry, you accuse me of having a theory which explains everything, and you're sitting there proposing that God can do absolutely everything. So why can't I say that God is nonsense, as much nonsense as my nonsense is?
Well, because... God's got a mind.
No, he hasn't. He's outside space and time. He doesn't have a mind. He's not some sort of figure with a brain and a mind.
You had an Anglican background. I mean, in Anglican theology, there's this idea that everything we see in the universe testifies that there's a mind behind it. I mean, where did our mind come from?
It came from evolution.
Well, there again, you're violating the principle of cause and effect in the sense you're trying...
No, I'm not.
Yeah, well, you are in this sense. Everything we measure in science tells us that you get the lesser from the greater, not the other way around.
That is nonsense, absolute nonsense. You're now alluding to the second law of thermodynamics, I think, and it shows the typical misunderstanding of that extraordinarily wonderful law. And maybe we do that in the next session.
Well, maybe we will. Let's go to a quick break. I mean, what you said in your book about fine-tuning, actually, Peter, is that no one has a clue as yet why these values have their current and for us serendipitous value.
Yes.
I mean, Hugh's view is simply that
God
the best explanation is that there is an intelligent mind
but
behind the universe.
that's just lazy.
It's not lazy in the sense that if we continue to do the research, which way does the trend go? I mean, you can't call that laziness. That's being diligent.
Well, the more science progresses, the less need it has of God.
It's the other way around. I mean, look at the origin of life. We were talking about that earlier. What we see at Origin of Life research conferences is that every successive conference, they have a lesser case for a naturalistic
There's
explanation.
more problems that they're running into.
They're running into more intractable problems as they continue to learn more about the origin of
It's extraordinarily
life.
difficult, but we're not going to just throw up our hands and say,
But
God
the
did
fact
it.
that it's getting more difficult.
We have got, as many difficulties as there are, we have possible explanations. It's just that we don't know
What I'm interested
we
to-
don't know the early conditions on Earth
Yes, we do.
sufficiently well.
What I'm
decide
interested
between
to
them.
know, though, Peter, is I think at one level, some people might accuse you of being so committed to atheism that you'd never be willing to countenance any evidence that might lend support to a creator behind the universe. So I'm just interested, what sort of evidence could science or the physical universe present to you that would make you think, actually, that is evidence that there's a mind behind this?
I find that a very difficult question.
Anything from, is
I
there
think-
any kind of evidence in the universe that could make, I mean, if the stars lined up to spell, Peter, please believe in me, it's about time. Would that
I
convince
put
you?
it down to madness,
You put it down, so,
to personal madness.
right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like, Peter, that there's no evidence that would persuade you away from atheism.
Well, to be honest, I think that's probably the case.